Hey guys, JC Dean here today. I want to talk a little bit about nutrition, and more importantly, I want to talk about 3 progress tracking pitfalls that I find over and over people falling into. And it's not your common stuff such as knowing how much protein or carbohydrates or fat to eat or knowing how to set your deficit. It's definitely connected to that and it's related, but there are some other things that people tend to screw up, so I'm going to help you understand those today. So the first thing I see that happens many times is someone cutting their intake drastically right off the bat. A really easy way to explain this is somebody going on the latest fad diet or trying something that's really extreme to kickstart their metabolism or to jumpstart their progress in terms of weight loss in the first week. So an idea of slashing all your carbohydrates, going on a massive keto style diet, or cutting out all fatty foods and eating nothing but leafy greens and other vegetables for your carbohydrate intake. Or some people just cutting out entire food groups altogether, such as just meat, dairy products, grains, whatever you want to say. What typically happens here is when you cut out a ton of food or a certain macronutrient, you're creating a huge caloric sink for the most part. And instead of getting a baseline for where you're at and understanding how much you're currently eating and what you would need to remove slightly to start seeing some progress, a lot of times within the first week or so, someone just wants to be drastic about it and make a ton of progress immediately. And I understand this way of thinking. The problem is if you start out with too steep of a deficit and you push that deficit for too long, it's just a matter of time before you bounce back and the pendulum is going to swing in the opposite direction. So initially, I don't like to start off with a huge deficit. You may end up increasing the deficit over time, but I would rather you have enough food to at least be full and at least cover your needs in terms of your energy requirements for your weight training, for your cardio sessions, and then start slowly whittling away as you need to over time. There's no need to get in a hurry. Yes, it might sound cool to lose 10 pounds in your first week, but when 90% of that is water and glycogen, it doesn't really matter because the end goal is to lose more body fat and have a leaner physique. It's not just to drop a ton of weight for the sake of dropping weight. Now, the second thing I notice is people not allowing enough time to recognize and see the progress. So this can piggyback off of the first point. If you start off with a more moderate deficit, or not even a deficit at all, and you just start out 2 or 3 weeks trying to assess your intake and figure out where you're at, you might see that as, okay, now it's time to get serious. I've gotten serious about my diet. It's time to start making progress. You might look back in 2 or 3 weeks and realize that the scale hasn't moved. Your measurements around your waist haven't changed. You might not look that much different in the mirror. So instead of accepting that for what it is and understanding that you're getting a baseline, and you interpret that as you're not making any progress, you might fall victim to the idea of going back to what I initially said, slashing calories or drastically changing something when you know now it's time to make a small change. And another problem with this is one of my current clients has seriously only lost about 10, 11 pounds in the last 8 months. Now, if you were to see her progress pictures and you would see her training logs, and you would see just how hard she's working, you would see that she's definitely made a lot of progress. But if you're going by scale weight alone, you might say, wow, she's not made any progress hardly at all for the time period. And I would have to agree with that. 10 pounds is not that much in 8 months. But after seeing her before and current pictures, she's made a ton of progress, seeing how much she's made in terms of strength gains, seeing how her work capacity has improved, seeing how she can do training programs now that I throw at her that would have wrecked her initially. So when I look at her progress, I'm not only looking at scale weight, I'm looking at pictures, I'm looking at measurements. She's lost 5 or 6 inches around her waist, and I'm also noticing how she's progressing in the gym on a week-to-week basis, and I'm seeing how she's doing with her feedback to me based on her sessions and how they're going. So remember that if 2 or 3 weeks go by and you haven't made a ton of progress in terms of scale weight or measurements or how you look in the mirror, realize that it doesn't necessarily mean it's the end or that you're hitting a plateau. You might wake up a week later and automatically be down 1 or 2 pounds depending on how much water you were holding the week or so before. So one thing I like to tell people is that progress is not always linear and is not always going to happen exactly the way you think it should. But as long as you're doing the right things, meaning you're training well, you're eating according to your plan, you're getting enough rest, and you're putting in the time, you're putting in the effort, progress is going to come. It just may not be as linear as you think it should be. And the last thing I see all the time, especially when it comes to nutritional habits, is the desire to change everything at once. So if you've been doing this for a period of time, 2 or 3 months, and you've only made a little bit of progress, it's really, really tempting to start making drastic changes. And one of the most drastic changes people tend to want to make is with their intake. I've seen it time and time again. Somebody will say, I think my carbs are too high, I think my fat's too high. Whatever it is that they think may or may not be true, but usually after that statement comes, I want to slash something, I want to make a drastic change because I want faster progress. And while we all want faster progress, sometimes it's just the way it is. You may have life stress, you may have more going on than you think you do. You may have things in your life that you aren't even aware of that's making you stressful and keeping stress hormones high and making it hard to lose the fat as fast as you want to. So usually whenever they say they want to make a change to their nutrition, they also want to make changes to their training as well. So that means they want to add another day, or they want a new training program altogether, which entirely does not make sense at all. When it comes to getting all this right for your fat loss goals, nutrition is really important. So you have to feed your body to make sure that you're able to recover, but also keep yourself in enough of a deficit that you see progress over time. But if you do decide to make some changes to your nutrition, then you need to make that change alone. You should never make an adjustment to your nutrition and your training and your sleep habits and add something else to give you a little more calorie burn. Because if you do start making progress, or you make drastic progress, how are you going to know which variable contributed the most? What I've found more times often than not is if I just add a day of training or add some conditioning to the end of a couple sessions per week, that might be all it takes to make progress start moving in the right direction again. Or maybe I need to remove 100 calories worth of fat or carbohydrate intake from 4 days of the week, or remove that from the training days per week, and that's just enough to get progress going again. So don't make the mistake of thinking that you have to change all the variables at once. It's best to make one change and give it 2 or 3 weeks, enough time to see if the progress is happening the way you want to, and then assess again. If you change too much at once, you're never going to know what worked best for you. You're never going to have the notes and the records to work from later on. So those are 3 things I see that happen quite frequently, but a lot of people don't talk about them that much. Number 1 is just creating too steep of a deficit early on in your diet, not giving yourself enough time to understand how things are going and assess your own progress, and then when it's time to make a change, making 2 or 3 changes instead of just making one and assessing over time. Thanks so much for watching. I'm JC Dean. I'll see you next time.